Educator and author Amy Bruckman joins the Plutopia podcast this time. Amy is Regents Professor and Senior Associate Chair in the School of Interactive Computing at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Contributing editor Wendy Grossman joins Jon and Scoop as we discuss Amy's book, Should You Believe Wikipedia? Online Communities and the Construction of Knowledge. We also explore compensating creators, online conspiracies, venture capital as a killer of apps, and ask, is Google search reliable?
You know, the reason I wrote my book was to help people to understand what a knowledge building community is. And I think understanding the design factors that go into any successful community can contribute to a successful knowledge building community, like finding ways for people to feel pride in what they contribute, for example, and finding ways for peer review to correct errors. That one is really critical. You need to make sure that people's contributions are in small pieces that can be easily combined. People will do lots of things if they can do a little bit here and a little bit there. If you give people a giant thing to do, then they're going to say, oh, I don't have time. But you give them a little chunk, then they'll do it. So if you break things into little chunks where lots of people can contribute and it zips together without too much effort, there's a lot you can do.
Welcome to another Plutopia podcast. Today our guest is Amy Bruckman. Amy is a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology, affiliated with the School of Interactive Computing and the GVU Center, which is Graphics, Visualization, and Usability. She's best known for her pioneering research in the fields of online communities and learning sciences, which we're all very interested in too. And she's the author of Should You Believe Wikipedia? Online Communities and the Construction of Knowledge. Also on board today, of course, I'm John Lebkowski, and I'm joined by co-hosts Scoop Sweeney and Wendy Grossman. And I guess I will ask the first question is, what does that question you asked on your book, Should You Believe Wikipedia? What does that have to do with online communities? How do they connect?
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here with kindred spirits. Great to see you guys. Thank you so much for having me. I think I started the whole book because of the title chapter, Should You Believe Wikipedia? And what I was thinking is that you really need to learn some epistemology, the theory of knowledge, to understand the internet at all these days, particularly social epistemology. So social epistemology teaches us that knowledge is socially constructed. How we know what is true depends on how many people believe it. Social construction can sometimes be wrong, but the more people agree something is true, the more faith we have in it. And if you don't understand that, you can't understand the whole internet. So it's kind of everything. The answer for Wikipedia is pretty straightforward, although completely counterintuitive, which is that a popular page is arguably the most reliable piece of information ever created by humans because of how carefully it's updated and maintained, because of how often it's scrutinized. An unpopular page might not be at all. There are great stories of hoaxes or mistakes that lingered on Wikipedia for sometimes up to 18 years. So it really depends on the page, which is not an easy answer for people to understand. That is not just about Wikipedia, it's about the whole internet, that we need to judge the reliability and that process is social.
You know, I remember reading some years ago that a lot of teachers at that time, this is probably 5 to 10 years ago, would tell their students that they should not rely on Wikipedia because it wasn't trustworthy. Instead, they should do a Google search. And it's this sort of thing that makes you want to scream, because Google is a completely black box. You have no idea how Google decides what are relevant search results. But Wikipedia, you can go and look at the talk page and you can see what the disagreements were in constructing the page and how it's been changed over time. And so you can learn something about how knowledge is curated. It just seemed to me completely backwards.
100% backwards. So well said, Wendy. Google is a complete mystery, and there's a whole lot more AI under the hood of a Google search than most people realize, and there always has been. It's yes, generative AI jumped into public notice last November with the public release of ChatGPT, but there has always been a ton of AI behind Google search, always.
Well,
And no, they don't tell you how it works.
It does depend what we think AI is, of course.
I guess if an instructor asked you to avoid Wikipedia and use Google search instead, you could just do a Google search and hope that Wikipedia shows up at the top of the search, right?
I don't think that would satisfy them.
It would if you were searching on DuckDuckGo, because the whole strategy behind DuckDuckGo is to direct people to the most popular results first, because on the basis that they're the most likely things that people are going to want, which unfortunately drives me crazy because, you know, if I'm trying to find a local restaurant, I want the restaurant's website, not Just Eat or, you know, DoorDash or Yelp. And, you know, it's becoming very frustrating that because I want the canonical, I want their website, not somebody else's, you know. But
however you do it, it has biases built in. And one of the big questions for us as designers is how can we make those biases visible?
Is that something most sites want to do? I don't think Google really particularly.
No, but they should.
Oh, yeah, they should. But then so should journalists writing newspaper articles.
Absolutely.
I guess part of the issue that we have now is, and it's huge, is where can we find any authority for knowledge? I mean, we have a lot of people creating knowledge systems and knowledge is appearing, and sometimes it's pretend knowledge. I mean, sometimes there's a lot of false information in the infosphere, but for most people, the question is, how can I believe anything really? Where can I go to find something that I can believe? You go to the New York Times, and it used to be that was considered a fairly authoritative resource, but now you have loud voices telling you that the New York Times is completely wrong or corrupt or partisan in some way, and you shouldn't trust them. Instead, you should trust Fox News, but Fox News appears to have some issues too, right? And then there's Reddit. I know you spend a lot of time on Reddit, and I find a lot of knowledge through Reddit surfing, but I don't know whether I can trust it or not.
You know, we're at a unique moment where what to believe is hard. I do think journalism plays an important role, and it's going to continue to deteriorate if we don't fund it better. So, you know, when I look back I teach a class called Design of Online Communities. It starts again in 2 weeks. And when I look back on the syllabi for the class, are all online from 1998 to the present. And when I look at what I knew in 1998 that I don't know now, a lot of it is about how the money works. And I think the money drives the engine. So I think we need to find better ways to compensate people who do the hard work of creating reliable information. And if we don't, we're just out of luck. People will work hard to do a good job creating good information if they get paid a living wage for it. I'm not talking about getting rich. I'm talking about compensating nice people at a fair wage. And that's increasingly hard.
Unfortunately, at the moment, we're compensating people like Alex Jones, who have extraordinarily large audiences on YouTube. I was at a Cambridge conference on disinformation last week, and there was 2 days of discussion of how to debunk things and pre-bunk things and journalistic integrity and generative AI and all these different things that are contributing to the rise of disinformation. And at the end of it, this woman got up and said, well, how do you explain flat Earth belief? She said, it's pre-bunked. We learn in school that it's not true. It's debunked, it's been disproven, centuries of work, and yet people believe it. And the guy who happened to be on stage at the time was a guy named Stefan Lewandowski. And he said that he thought the key was internet communities, that, in real life, flat earthers would be so thinly distributed through the population that probably none of them would meet another one in their lifetime. But now on the internet, they find each other, and all of a sudden there's a community of 1,000. He said, once you have a community, it's any external debunking becomes part of the conspiracy. So, I mean, how do you counter
Yeah,
this?
My former student Sichia Zhao and Coy Cheshire at Berkeley and I did a study of people who believe in the chemtrails conspiracy. Chemtrails is the belief that the visible condensation trails behind airplanes are deliberate spraying for evil purposes. And what we found is that a lot of these people are dissatisfied with life in some fashion and looking for greater meaning. When they meet other chemtrails believers, they are handed two things. First, an explanation for what is wrong with everything. Everything that is wrong with my life is because of chemtrails. Some of them, for example, have autoimmune disorders, and just believing that it's unknown biology why I got this autoimmune disorder and other people didn't is hard to accept. But to say that airplane is spraying me with poison on purpose suddenly focuses the mind. So they get an explanation for whatever it is they need explained, number one. And number two, they get a family, a community. So once you get welcomed into this group, you know the answer to everything, and you're now buddies with a group of other people who also know the answer to everything. It's very seductive, whether the truth you find together is true or false.
Yeah, I think there's what you might call you might call it belief light. It's like holding a belief because it gives you something to talk about. You don't necessarily really deeply believe it, but it's a belief system that has a community around it. So you just kind of join the community, and I can get the chemtrail thing.
I agree with you, Jon, but I would be a little more humble about it and say that all of our beliefs work that way. So I believe that human activity is changing the climate. Do I know anything about climate science? No, I do not. But I know there are journalistic sources and scientific sources that I have chosen to trust. But is that a deep belief or a surface belief? I'm accepting things that are handed to me. And it's about picking the right sources to trust, I guess. But I mean, I think all belief works that way.
Well, I think I came to believe in the chemtrail thing because after 70 years of exposure to chemtrails, my hair started turning white. So there must be something to it, right? But you can definitely believe it's climate change if you walk outside in Texas right now, because it is like a furnace out there. Yeah, really.
But both of those, neither of those actually is a good example of a well-founded belief, because they're both could be correlation as opposed to causality. So, the reason we believe that climate change is proceeding is not that it's hot in Texas today. It's that it's hot in Texas and there are fires in Hawaii and it's flooding in someplace else. And all of these freak weather patterns that have not been common before. And they are things that scientists have predicted would happen if we got to a certain stage.
Yeah, and it's record-breaking heat, too.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's record-breaking heat in a lot of places. It's not just Texas. And if it were just Texas, you could say, well, it's an anomaly, and you could look to see what might be causing it as an anomaly. The interesting thing about flat Earth belief, one of my friends spent a couple of years hanging out with flat Earthers and studying what they were thinking about, is that we think of it as one belief, but actually there are like many different models for how the Earth can be flat. And so there are little disagreements within the flat earthers. They're hotly debated topics of like whether it's a diamond shape or whether, I forget all the different models there are, but which reminds me
of a lot of the flat earthers are see themselves as scientists, and they actually do experiments to prove the Earth is flat with measurements and instruments. And The only thing you need to do to prove the Earth is flat is to measure the curvature of the Earth scientifically and do it badly.
Yes.
And but they believe it.
Yes. Absolutely.
So Wendy and I are both members of the Well, and the Well is an online community that has existed since 1985. So it's been around for quite a long time. And I know there are a lot of other gatherings of people online, including social media, which I sometimes describe as drive-by posting. But I'm wondering, have you some thoughts about what it takes for a community that forms online to really have that kind of persistence?
Well, one of the first things I teach in online communities class is Ray Oldenburg's book, The Great Good Place, and thinking about how we all need a place that is neither work nor home. And Oldenburg studied cafes and bars and what the characteristics of those are that make them supportive for people's lives. I think a lot of the successful places have characteristics of third places.
And what are some of those characteristics?
Well, the most obvious one is that conversation is the main activity. Another would be approximate location, which for Oldenburg meant that the corner pub is not a 30-minute drive, it's a stroll down the block. And for online, yeah, it's easy, it's right there. He has a list of design criteria. A good third place is a leveler, where people from different social strata can interact as peers. It's a really interesting piece of sociology, and it's the first thing I teach my online community students every semester.
Since Elon Musk and his site formerly known as Twitter became somewhat less reliable, a lot of different new players have sprung up, Blue Sky, Mastodon, and whatever it is that Zuckerberg's calling his. And these can't exist long term, do you think? Because there's only so much room for these kind of sites. So how do you see these surviving? Are any of them survivable, or is it just going to be a scorched earth campaign that no one wins?
Scoop, this is such an interesting time. We fell into a pattern where you had the major players were Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and it felt almost like that made sense and that was going to be eternal. And now everything is blown up, everything is different. The early days of automobiles, there were literally thousands of car companies, and then there were a couple major ones that won and that persisted at scale. It seems quite likely that that's what's going to happen again, that there will be winners. I hope that one of the winners is nonprofit like Mastodon and ActivityPub, because as I argue in my book, I believe that platforms that are driven by neoliberal profit motives can never do the right things for individuals or for communities. I mean, when you think about Facebook in Myanmar, what did they do? They said, well, we don't really have a lot of business in Myanmar right now, but it would be good to be there so that we get a foot in the door, but we won't invest a whole lot in native language moderation tools or native language staff because we're not making any money from it. So we'll just keep it low profile. From a business perspective, they did the right thing, except that genocide was facilitated on Facebook in Myanmar, and there was no one there to stop it and no one there to notice. So their business-driven policies literally killed people. But from a business perspective, they did the right thing. My conclusion is that we need to be driven by values, not by business imperatives. Business imperatives do not magically make the right thing happen.
My friend Charles Arthur wrote a book called Social Warming, in which he said, pretty much what you said, which is that, the reason we're in the state we're in is that nobody acted to prevent it.
Absolutely.
But the thing that surprised me was realizing, Twitter, I knew Twitter was kind of Twitter's influence was disproportionate to its size. It was basically because journalists loved it, and once you have a lot of journalists, all the politicians flock in, and so its importance was about who used it, you know. But even, you know, it was never a big moneymaker. I was very startled to realize that Reddit has been basically kept afloat by venture capital money for years. Reddit, you know, when this was the interesting thing, when the thing blew up on Reddit, as it did recently, where they started charging for the API, and all the moderators objected and started an online protest. It was startling to realize that actually Reddit was going to be in trouble either way. You know, if the moderators won, Reddit still didn't have much of a financial future, and how was it going to keep going? And if they lost, then it still wasn't clear what the sustainable business model is for Reddit. And,
yeah, I agree. I am an active Redditor. I'm a mod on Our Science. I am a mod on Argotech. I am the only faculty member mod with a group of students, and I'm most honored that the students trust me to help out. And I run a subreddit called Gun Insights, which is for civil discussion of gun policy across political difference. It's an experiment in, can we all get along? Can we talk to people we disagree with? So I spend my free time arguing about statistics, about whether any of the problems with gun violence are really because 18-year-olds are allowed to buy semi-automatic weapons. Is that, or is that not part of the problem? I love Reddit. I think Reddit has always had a grassroots feel, bottom up, power to the people. If you don't like the Reddit client that is provided by the company, make your own. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. And when they shut off API access, they tamp down a lot of that grassroots spirit. And I think a lot of the mods remain dispirited. I know very active mods on Our Science who quit and said, I'm out, this is enough. I think it'll pop back, but the fight about charging for the API is not gonna change whether they become a viable business one way or the other, as you said, Wendy. I mean, they have to find a business model that is stronger than what they've got.
You talk about the grassroots characteristics of some services, and some of the services, internet services, media that have had troubles always seem to be the fingerprints of venture capital behind the scenes. It was what was really the downfall of a lot of companies, a lot of services, because venture capital doesn't really care about the grassroots. It cares about the bottom line and keeping the stockholders happy and rich. And as long as we have that kind of thing going on, it's hard for a company to be financed if they don't yield in to the temptation of bringing the venture capitalists in. Is there any
I couldn't agree more.
alternative?
Once upon a time, a couple decades ago, Brenda Laurel founded a company called Purple Moon, which was designing empowering software for girls. And right when Purple Moon broke even in profitability, they shut it down. Now, you got to scratch your head and say, wait, they got profitable. Why would you shut it down when they got profitable? And the answer is the venture capitalists were looking for the next Amazon, the next eBay. They were looking for a huge win, and merely, hey, we're doing good for the world and breaking even is not good enough. So they shut it down. That kind of thinking cannot save the world.
I'm not sure there is a really good business model for community. You know, I mean, if community is not really a business. Community, people come together, and if they form community, that's great. You might have a platform where people can build communities, like Facebook is a platform where you could potentially build communities, but Facebook doesn't care about communities, or it doesn't care how it serves people. The main thing is it cares about engagement, because it sells the engagement to advertisers. So I think the problem is that we don't have spaces It isn't true that we don't. I mean, we have few spaces that are created primarily to be community. And you know, the well is an example of a place that was at one time, I mean, it was originally created to be a community, and then at one time it was acquired by uh, a money person, Bruce Cates is who I'm thinking about, who tried to find a way to make money with it, never quite did, sold it to Salon. They tried to figure out how to make it part of their, you know, milieu so that it served whatever business model they had. And that didn't work out. And at that point, they were going to sell the domain name, and instead the community itself put together enough money to buy the well, or some members of the community, a subset, bought the well, and now it's owned by some of its own members. And that seems to be, you know, I asked earlier, how do you get these things to persist? That's one way that the well has managed to survive, is that the people who really cared about it bought it, and they figured out a way to make it break even, but they haven't had to worry about profit. They're not really trying to make a profit. They're just trying to persist.
You know, my mental model of how this could work is like community health groups. So your local, say, HIV services organization that serves your community with support for people who are sick and prevention in the local community, the way they stay afloat is by getting government grants. And every year they write a report on, these are the people we serve, this is the good we did for the community, please may we have money for next year. And the government sends them a big check. And they also do some fundraising and have fundraising events. So it's mostly public, mostly government, a little bit of fundraising from the public. And using those sources, they stay afloat if they're doing well. And if they serve their community poorly, then they shut down and someone else opens a new community health group. I think we need community information groups that, again, apply for a government grant. And the government's not going to tell them what to say, but the government's going to say, okay, you followed your mission statement and provided service to your community last year, so here's money for the next year. I think it can work the same way, and it has to.
Do you know of any examples of services like that exist right now?
NPR?
Yeah, CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I used to work in public radio, and that was a great source until Donald Trump gutted it. I'm hoping it can recover.
I have been on the advisory board for WABE since 2009. On the Digital Services Advisory Board.
Isn't that one of the problems, though? If you're dependent on grant money, you're dependent on the whims of the grantor. And, you know, a new administration comes in, or if you're getting money from some foundation or something, a new administrator comes in, and all of a sudden you're out of luck. I mean, I've seen that happen to folk clubs, which are certainly not profit-making enterprises.
I didn't say it was easy or reliable. But it's better than trying to make money by selling people's personal data. Yeah. You know, subscription-based models, the other way to go. I know a number of Mastodon servers where the server owner had to turn off donations because they got too much money. They just wanted to cover the hosting fees, and everyone sent them so much money that they said, okay, stop, please stop. Donation box closed.
One of the things that I find fascinating, actually, is that as people move services for one reason or another, a lot of people have left the well. A lot of people have left Kix, which is the London equivalent. People who used to know each other on CompuServe, you know, people who used to know each other on AOL, they find each other again on some other service. And it's actually very interesting how communities sort of partially migrate together.
Absolutely.
The people you first form good, you know, sort of close relationships with online tend to be the people that you stick with as you get older. And
yeah, Celia Pierce, who is faculty at Northeastern, studied migration from the original MIST online server and what happened after it closed and how all the people recreated it and stayed together. So Celia does some really interesting work in that area.
I'm just realizing that Plutopia News Network is a community information group, and we didn't even realize it. I think we fit.
You do fit. I like it.
And it would be nice if we could build a community. We've given that some thought. I think that the future of the human race, I guess, I mean, if we're to like kind of work our way around potential apocalypse, things are looking kind of bad right now. There's a lot of people who offer boil the ocean models for saving the world or whatever. But I think it's going to be a matter of smaller clusters of people that come together, and some of them will have more influence on the future than their numbers would suggest. And I don't know of a better way to do it. It's just like I don't know how to scale community. I know that Reddit and the Well are similar in their structure, but Reddit doesn't feel like a community. I know subreddits can be like communities, but overall Reddit feels like it just has so many people on it. It feels like, how do you get where do you find that manageable number of people that can actually form a community? On the Well, it's small enough that people do sort of know each other in the sense that you know each other in a small town. But when you have the big city, it's what you have is clusters of communities within that city.
Yeah, Reddit doesn't feel like a community to me. The Slack where the our science mods hang out does. You need to have the right scale.
I've always felt Reddit was kind of a graphical version of Usenet. It feels very much to me like Usenet did. And
Absolutely.
Hmm?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I always think of the subreddits as work, but I've just come up with a line which I have might have something or might not. Community is something that happens when you're making other plans. Like you don't when you open a pub, you don't decide to open a community. You open a pub and you serve drinks, and the people who like the pub keep coming back and they form a community. Facebook didn't set out to form communities. It set out to to hook people up to their personal networks or whatever they decided to do. Twitter didn't know when it set up that it was going to be a community. It was going to have all these communities on it. It just said, gee, this messaging thing is useful.
Yeah, actually, and in those two cases, I don't think they started with a business model in mind. They evolved a business model as they grew.
Well, in Facebook's case, they hired Sheryl Sandberg, who had created Google's advertising business, and then she went and did the same thing for Facebook. There's a lot to blame Sheryl Sandberg for in terms of advertising business models.
A deep silence follows.
Well, I can kick in here about my various projects that I've done on the internet and elsewhere over the years. I always wanted to have a community form, and I found that you form a community when instead of talking to some group, you talk with some group. That's the real key. If you're just preaching to a bunch of people, it's hard to get them involved. But if there's interaction, that seemed to be the key to creating a community.
Well, I'll tell you about some new work going on in my lab that I don't know if it'll work or not, and y'all can tell me how to make it work. We are thinking deep thoughts about service industry workers and how to get them to talk to one another about how to improve working conditions, particularly focusing on Starbucks initially. And what we're finding by interviewing Starbucks workers is that, there's one store manager who has a really nice way with her staff, and when something goes wrong, she has a nice way of educating it, and other stores where the manager's awful. And if we could all just get together and say, hey, this is how we handle this hard issue that comes up. Could you share from each store to store, information on how to make it a better way of life for the employees. So we're trying to figure out, how would you get people to bother to participate? How would you get people to share information that is useful to others? How do you get someone to recognize that, the way that your store manager handles doing the vacation schedule over major holidays is really nice. The other people could learn from that. We're working on supporting union drives and also working on just sharing wisdom about how to change the company from within.
I actually did that one time, and I did it from within the company. And the company I was working for is Whole Foods Market, which at the time was just starting to put some internet stuff together. But we had like major domo email lists that were internal to the company. And primarily we had a company-wide email list where anybody could send an email and everybody in the company would see it. And occasionally we'd have people show up with complaints, and they were distracting complaints. And there were complainers who complained about the complaints because they said, we shouldn't have that in our email list. So I said, well, easy. I'll just create an email list where people can go with their complaints. And I called it Rants. Started an email list called Rants, and it turned into a community of mostly service workers, i.e. the people who worked in the Whole Foods stores. And they were hitting that thing pretty hard too. And they complained about all kinds of things, not just stuff that was going on within the company, but other stuff too. But basically there were some productive conversations there. And it was an opportunity for, you had people all across America who were all working for Whole Foods Market, and they actually got to kind of know each other and share some stories and so forth. I think that, I always thought that was a pretty successful community effort, though I know there were some managers in the company who were skeptical of it. They didn't want people sitting around ranting all the time.
I love that, Jon. We may have to get your advice on our new project. But, this is
it started from within the company, and I don't know if Starbucks would do that, but if you had some buy-in within the company, that kind of helps,
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, these are interesting design problems. What can the technology do, and how do you get it started? Those are hard.
And we just started just a little email list with the idea of kind of diverting some conversation that they didn't want to have on that main list. And I think because we started very small, we had humble origins for the thing. That sort of allowed it to just kind of sit there and percolate for a while, and it started picking up more and more users. More and more people were interested in entering the conversation.
Love it.
It was an attractive nuisance.
Back one of my unadvertised parts of my resume back in pre-email, back in the early 70s, I was a steward and organizer for the Office Workers Union in Oakland. And
nice.
We basically were organizing the employees of Kaiser Permanente medical care. And it was great. We really had buy-in because we had a lot of activists. Back in those days, you couldn't swing a cat in Oakland without hitting an activist. So there were plenty of people who wanted to participate. Problem being, Kaiser Permanente found a sympathetic union in Southern California that came in and essentially killed off the Office Workers Union, became basically the company union. And that's what you see happening, unfortunately, is the original, union structure was great, back when unions were starting to organize during the early industrial age. They had a lot of influence, but companies found ways of derailing those or subverting them. And you see that happening even in the Starbucks things, because they're all franchises. So these are little independent kingdoms that have bought a franchise. So it's hard for any of those franchise operations to really exert serious power over these people who actually paid for their business.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're at a really interesting moment in history where labor union work is becoming viable again, becoming common again. The UPS workers just got a huge victory and I love that all the workers got together and said the wages of the part-timers matter. It wasn't the full-timers versus the part-timers. It was, we care about the part-timers. I will be really interested to see what happens with the SAG-AFTRA strike. Both the actors and the writers. It's a kind of connects to what we were talking about earlier about how business models are changing. With streaming revenue, we have to figure out how to compensate both actors and writers in a fair way in this totally new environment.
Well, I think the next step is to have teach businesses to think like co-ops. Whether they make a co-op conversion or not, if they just kind of are more inclusive of their workers. I had a business that I turned into a co-op, and it was nothing but good to do that, but it was very small. It's more of a challenge to take a huge business and turn it into a co-op. And, you kind of look at how the entertainment industry works. They have really big projects with a whole lot of people in the project. And how do you get all of those people to feel a real sense that they're bought into the project and that they're part of it? You don't do it by just kind of pushing them around. You've got to be welcoming, right? You got to make them feel like you want them to be there.
It does seem to me, though, that one of the keys in Hollywood is that the streaming services have broken the feedback loop that existed, where when you had television ratings and you had box office takings, you had a way of judging the success or failure of a particular product. The streaming services don't make that data public. They, I'm sure, know themselves how many people have watched a given show, but they don't disclose that. They don't explain any of their decisions. And so this is one of the key problems. It's a structural problem that needs to be solved. And I think opening the data is actually a key remedy there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some very dysfunctional stuff happening. So I was halfway through watching, I think it's a Norwegian TV show. It was lovely. Something with the Beformers or something like that. I was halfway through watching it, and HBO, now Max, took it offline because they were like, "Yeah, not worth it." Wait, I have 6 episodes left. It was good. And the content is there, and they're not sharing it with anyone because of the business model. And I wasn't done. Or first yet, what was the movie that they killed before it ever went to the theaters? It was in the can. It was done. Superhero movie.
Yeah, I've heard about this, and it's thought that at least in some cases, it's to be able to get the tax write-off. There are a lot of people that I'm seeing saying, "Well, it is your moral duty to pirate these shows and keep them alive."
That one that didn't come through was Catwoman.
I think. Right. Now, it might have been bad, and maybe they spared us something bad, but
there are people who don't think it's bad at all, and it was just a business decision. And I think that my recollection is that I read that they were canceling it to take the write-off, regardless of the quality of the film.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of recording those endangered programs. Yeah, I don't do a lot of that kind of recording, but I'm a analog fan. I'm surrounded in my studio here by vinyl records and reel-to-reel tapes and cassette tapes and things that go back decades. And I found that was a really good thing that I did, because I have things on there that you cannot find anywhere. You look for it online, it's not there. And if you do find it, it's been messed with, repurposed or remixed. A good example, there was a TV series, Rob Morrow was the star of it. It was in the in Alaska. I'm trying to remember the name of it now.
Northern Exposure.
Northern Exposure, right. You cannot find the original version because back when they did that, they had a lot of great classic music that was used in the soundtrack. But unfortunately, they didn't retain the rights to all that music. So they re-released it with a lot of schmucky, throwaway music that they just replaced everything with, and it did not work. And you find a lot of that out there, that if you can find this rare old piece of programming, it's been messed with in some way.
Have you tried YouTube? Because a lot of people have put video recordings of old shows like that up there, and also at the Internet Archive you can find some in the community video area. And I have found some otherwise unavailable things. It might be worth looking for the original there.
Yeah, a lot of problems
Maybe
with.
send me the name of the TV program you were halfway through watching, and I'll see if I can help you.
I will.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I see on YouTube, unfortunately, has it's great content, but there aren't a lot of people who really know how to properly record and archive content. So you'll run across a great show, but it's the audio squirrely, the video is kind of choppy. So unfortunately, there's a lot of that out there that's just really not bearable.
The old kinescopes that don't really translate well to digital format.
And the big overarching problem is that we know how to compensate the capital owners, but not how to compensate the extra.
Yeah, because I was going to say, because one of the extraordinary things about the SAG-AFTRA strike is that the actors, the leading people in the strike, in certainly in the actors' strike, are very famous A-listers who could be doing anything else with their time if they chose to. I mean, people like, one of the key players was Meryl Streep, who sort of pushed them to take the plight of less successful actors seriously. And that was actually one thing that the writers may have made a mistake about the last time they were on strike, I think 2007, 2008, was they didn't include the people who worked on reality television. Well, they're not scripting, but actually they would have done better to do that, because one of the reasons for the rise of reality television was that it wasn't part of the union deal.
I wonder if these SAG-AFTRA people have communities that have formed online, if they're using that online tools to hold their thing together. I bet they are.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I think it would make a really nice study.
But again, they see each other on the picket line every day. I mean, that's part of the community also, is the fact that they're all out there, sort of marching around for hours.
Well, the ones who aren't having to work as baristas to put bread on the table anyway.
Well, some are doing both.
Yeah.
I know some of those people. I have a lot of friends who are techs in Hollywood, and they're trying to go on the picket line, but a lot of them have serious bills they have to pay. So they're out trying to go outside of the market even, and doing non-union work elsewhere. And that's, good for them, but bad, for the overall union movement.
I mentioned co-ops earlier, but that kind of relates to something you talked about, Amy, in your book, and I really wanted to get to this and talk about it, which is how peer production works. Can you say a little bit about, like, thinking about Wikipedia, how does Wikipedia work as an example of peer production?
The cool thing about peer production is that people self-select what they believe they want to work on and have the skills to work on, and they contribute something. And when lots of people in parallel contribute, you can build something amazing, one little piece at a time. So Wikipedia is peer production. I mean, who would have thought that it would be possible to make a comprehensive encyclopedia just by letting anybody add things? It's kind of amazing. But when you let each person add what they know about, and let people use hold them accountable for using strong citation practices so that everything is reliable, you can really build something amazing. You know, I think I'm a gamer and I like playing video games. But when and I will always play some video games some of my time, but when I think about all the human effort that is kind of, forgive me, wasted on killing imaginary monsters, if you took just 10% of that time and had people contribute to something shared and that has value, you could really do something amazing.
Have you studied OpenStreetMap at all?
I have seen a little bit about it. I don't know it well, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was right around the time that a British MP got up and said, "Oh, no government could build something like Street View," and apparently somebody thought, "Well, I bet we could do it." And it's just amazing. It is amazing to me. I was listening to a podcast about its history just actually this morning, and this was one of the volunteers on the project, and he said, they would just have these mapping parties, and people would show up with like detailed surveys of the place they lived, or and everybody would spend enormous amounts of time building this thing. And when the day came that you were no longer having people show up and say, "How long before this is useful in France?"
Yeah.
It was a really big watershed.
So another interesting example of peer production is citizen science. So we have a growing number of projects where ordinary people can contribute to real science, either by gathering data or interpreting data. There are all different modes of citizen science production. Gathering data about where there are birds, or analyzing data about, is that galaxy, what shape is it? It's really interesting to see what lots of people working together can accomplish.
An early project like that from UC Berkeley was the SETI project, where the search for extraterrestrial search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and they had people using their downtime on their computers to process signals that they had brought in over the Arecibo dish, and I did it for a long time just because I thought that was a very cool thing for a lot of people to be doing. You may or may not find the aliens, but you're doing citizen science in a group
Absolutely.
setting, and I thought that was an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on that for a while, and then when they started folding proteins, I switched to that instead. I think one of my computers is still folding proteins in its spare time.
Well, I used to hang out a bit with Wikipedians. I've known some. I actually have done some Wikipedia editing, and I'm fascinated by talk pages. And I think that that's just a powerful community that's formed. And it emerged, and they started creating practices. They sort of built a community of practice around editing Wikipedia that, as you say, produces an incredible result. I mean, it's very accurate much of the time.
Well, it's funny.
In areas where they have attention to it, anyway.
So my student Andrea Forte and I studied Wikipedia very early on, and I remember the meeting where Andrea said, we were analyzing our interview data and trying to make sense of it, and Andrea said, "Amy, it's a knowledge building community of practice." And I looked at her and said, "Andrea, it's almost like we make you read all that theory for a reason."
The thing I wonder, there's two things about Wikipedia that worry me. One is that every social medium of any kind, and I'm including knowledge projects, has an audience. It hits at a certain moment, and I worry about the community of editors at Wikipedia aging to the point where you stop having, I don't know how many younger people start joining it because it's not the cool thing right now. It's something else is the cool thing. And the other thing about Wikipedia is the bigger issue is not really how accurate its pages are, because you can fact check things and you can do things. It's what it omits. And I have seen, for example, stories about women who've held hackathons to try to get more pages about women into Wikipedia, and had a lot of them reversed as soon as the event ended. And, you know, I personally tried to set up a page about a female author. Everybody she worked with had a Wikipedia page. She had an obit in the New York Times, and yet somehow Wikipedia didn't think she was notable enough. You know,
It's that is my biggest concern about Wikipedia. We do need more new editors. There are a number of research projects to try and get more people editing. And we need to not bite the newcomer. And there are a dozen projects to try and not teach people to not bite the newcomer. Like, for example, the Wikipedia Tea House, where you can go to the Tea House pages and ask for advice and support. You know, I've been editing Wikipedia since it started. I remember creating a number of well-established pages early on where I just threw up a stub and said, so for example, I created all the food allergy pages. When I started, there was a page for food allergy, but no page for separate for peanut allergy and milk allergy. My kids had food allergies when they were babies, and I became very interested in this out of necessity. And I just threw up a almost blank page saying peanut allergy, and then people added to it. And added to it and added to it, and everyone was just appreciative. Oh yeah, we really should have a peanut allergy page. You can't do that stuff these days. Just throw up a stub and say, hey, shouldn't we have a page about X? No, they'll bite your head off. They can be nasty. And learning the social norms can be stressful, even for people who know Wikipedia really well. So I think that is a threat to the integrity of the project in the future.
I had a huge debate with those guys once when a friend of mine who has a Wikipedia page, and he's pretty well known, he asked me to change, actually his wife asked me to change the picture of him that they had on Wikipedia. And I thought, well, this will be easy enough. We've got a better picture here. I'll just plant that on there. Well, first of all, they were riled because I had, it wasn't clear to them whether I had permission to use that picture. So we tracked down the photographer and got his permission and so forth. And then at some point they said, well, just because the person the article is about wants a particular picture on the article doesn't mean that we should do it. And I was thinking, but why not, you know? And it felt to me like they were sort of like arguing for the sake of argument. So I think there's some of that goes on, you know, just.
There are places where you need to work hard to maintain integrity and places where maybe they go overboard. And those are both true.
Yeah, I have a problem with the people that you see, some of them even advertise. There are corporate editors who actually go in and work for a particular person or company to massage their Wikipedia entry to meet not the truth, but to make it look good for whatever their reasons are. And there are those out there, and that concerns me.
Works hard to put a stop to that, but they can't always do that. I know, here's a little trivia for you. I know at one point they had banned the IP address of the congressional office building entirely. So any congressional staffer could not edit Wikipedia while at work.
Unless they went to Starbucks, right?
Yeah, unless they went to Starbucks, yeah. So,
well, I worked with one of those guys, and he was dyed-in-the-wool Wikipedian who understood the culture really well. And he worked pretty well with Wikipedia and with the organization. I didn't get the sense that there was any pushback on having him there, partly because he stayed within the rules. You know, I mean, he stayed in his lane about it, and he didn't really he didn't try to put his thumb on the scale in favor of the organization. The intention was just to make sure that Wikipedia content was accurate.
Sometimes it's a struggle. The journalist Heather Brooke, who is American but lives in Britain, likes to tell the story that The Guardian wrote a piece about her and said that involved saying that she had covered, I forget what absurd number of murders in the town she lived in before she moved to Britain. And she cannot get it out of Wikipedia. She spent years trying to get it out of her Wikipedia page, and she couldn't because it was in the Guardian.
That's a funny error, yeah, because Guardian has a lot of credibility.
Yeah, but it's just journalists writing things, and some of them make mistakes sometimes.
Got to get the Guardian to retract it, then you can get it fixed on Wikipedia. Good luck with that.
I think she did. I think she may have had a correction, but she still didn't get anywhere. I don't know. Maybe she's fixed it now.
Well, we're getting close to the end. We're like about 3 minutes from the end. And of course, we don't want to end too quickly because some people don't like that. But I do have a question about, and it's kind of a big question, but I'm just wondering if you can throw out a couple of things about like best practices for building a knowledge sharing community or a knowledge building community.
Oh gosh, that's not a quick question, Jon.
I know it's not, but I thought maybe you had a few things at the top of your head about that.
Well, I think the reason I wrote my book was to help people to understand what a knowledge building community is. And I think understanding the design factors that go into any successful community can contribute to a successful knowledge building community, like finding ways for people to feel pride in what they contribute, for example, and finding ways for peer review to correct errors. That one is really critical. You need to make sure that people's contributions are in small pieces that can be easily combined. People will do lots of things if they can do a little bit here and a little bit there. If you give people a giant thing to do, then they're going to say, oh, I don't have time. But you give them a little chunk, then they'll do it. So if you break things into little chunks where lots of people can contribute and it zips together without too much effort, there's a lot you can do.
And I know if the project is like a critical project where it really has to be done just right, it's good to have a leader who is a strong leader, but also doesn't alienate people. I'm thinking about somebody like Linus Torvalds on the Linux project.
Right. And The Cathedral and the Bazaar by Eric Raymond details what a good leader of an open source project, the characteristics they should have. Like charisma, for example. You don't think of a critical prerequisite for a successful software project being charisma, but it absolutely is.
Dang, I wish I had charisma.
I think you do.
I think you can get it from Amazon.
Well, we are about at the end of our hour. And I want to say thank you, Amy, for joining us. And I feel like there's a lot more we could have discussed, like my spot question there at the end that didn't really give you enough time to answer. So maybe you'll come back sometime. Would that be okay?
I would love that. I love you guys. I feel like we are fellow travelers, and it is a great privilege to spend an hour with you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks. And thanks to Scoop and Wendy and all of you millions of listeners out there who are listening to this right now or watching it on YouTube.
The audience, he ran forward.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. See you next time.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.